In the dead of night, when the palace usually sleeps beneath the weight of centuries, footsteps echoed through its marble halls. Prince William, future king, symbol of stability, was walking away. Not for duty, not for ceremony, but for good. The silence that followed his departure wasn't peace. It was the sound of history shattering, a son's defiance, a father's shock, a nation about to awaken to a reality it never imagined. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began quietly, almost too quietly, for something so monumental. William didn't need fanfare or confrontation. He needed clarity. For months, maybe years, he had felt it coming, a storm brewing behind the gilded facade of royal harmony. Every gesture, every forced smile at public events carried the weight of unspoken discontent. And now, in this hour when time itself seemed to hold its breath, he acted. Catherine's eyes met. His, not with surprise but with understanding. She had seen the cracks forming long before anyone else dared to acknowledge them. Together, they gathered their children, George, Charlotte, and little Louis, shielding them from the chaos that would soon engulf the palace. In the dim glow of the corridor lamps, the walls seemed to close in, whispering the secrets of centuries past. Generations of monarchs had walked those same halls, each bound by an invisible chain of duty and sacrifice. Yet tonight, that chain broke. For William, this was not a moment of escape. It was a declaration. Every step he took was a rebellion against the silence that had imprisoned his family for too long. He was not leaving as a prince. He was leaving as a man reclaiming his right to live on his own terms. The aides who stumbled upon the quiet exodus were paralyzed. These were individuals trained to anticipate every royal move, every protocol, every breath that might disturb the stillness of monarchy. But this, they never saw coming. Some stood frozen, unsure whether to stop him or bow in reverence. Others exchanged helpless glances, caught between loyalty to the crown and respect for the man they had silently admired. The whispers began immediately soft, trembling, and filled with disbelief. "The prince is gone," one muttered, as if saying it aloud might summon him back. But William was already beyond their reach, walking not into exile, but into history. Outside, the air was cold and heavy, carrying the scent of liberation. For centuries, the palace had been both fortress and prison, a place of grandeur that demanded silent obedience from those who lived within its walls. But William's decision marked a fracture in that legacy, a moment when the future king chose heart over hierarchy. His actions weren't born of impulse, but precision. The departure was planned, executed with quiet resolve, and rooted in something far deeper than rebellion. It was truth, a truth too heavy to remain, buried beneath protocol and pretense. For the first time, the crown did not dictate his next move. No advisor guided his hand. No tradition silenced his voice. The torch of change that Diana once carried in defiance now passed through him. And in that fleeting moment between darkness and dawn, the world's most watched family was about to face its most dangerous truth, that power without peace is nothing but a curse. But this wasn't just a night of departure, it was the eruption of decades of tension. And at the heart of that storm stood a father, a son, and the woman who had forever divided them. Before that midnight exodus, 1,000 unspoken words had already poisoned the air inside Buckingham Palace. The tension between King Charles and Prince William was not born overnight. It was a fire smoldering behind carefully drawn curtains. What the public saw as unity was, in truth, a battlefield of broken trust. Behind every royal smile was a wound, and behind every handshake, a war, waiting to explode. In the gilded corridors of power, silence was not peace, it was suppression. Years of restrained anger and unspoken disappointment hung between father and son like a ghost neither dared confront. From the moment Charles ascended the throne, William had been told his time would come, but that promise felt more like punishment. The new king ruled with tradition as his weapon, clinging to rituals that belonged to another age. William, in contrast, believed in a monarchy that could evolve, breathe, and exist with the people not above them. But every time he spoke of change, of transparency, of breaking down the barriers between palace and public, his words were dismissed as youthful impatience. Charles would smile thinly and remind him, "The crown is not a democracy." Those words, repeated too often, became chains around William's spirit. It wasn't just ideology that divided them, it was loyalty. Camilla's influence had begun to bleed into every royal decision. Her voice, soft yet steady, carried a weight that William could no longer ignore. In meetings once reserved for the heir, Camilla sat beside the king, her opinions shaping outcomes that excluded William entirely. The son, who had once been a confidant, was now a bystander. Every decision that favored Camilla's comfort over William's counsel drove another wedge between them. Behind closed doors, tempers flared. Arguments that began in whispers escalated into words that could never be taken back. Catherine tried to hold the crumbling bridge together. With quiet grace, she sought reconciliation, reminding both men of the legacy they shared, the image they must protect. But even she could feel it slipping away. Each conversation with Charles ended the same way. Polite nods, hollow assurances, and the cold distance of a man too proud to yield. William would return to her, his frustration masked behind stoic silence, his hands trembling with rage he refused to show. She understood his torment, the impossible task of serving a system that demanded loyalty, but offered none in return. Within those palace walls, William no longer felt like a son, nor even a prince. He felt like an intruder. The home that once symbolized continuity now felt like a trap. The family dinners grew quieter, the smiles more forced, the laughter more rehearsed. What bound them was not love, but obligation. Every time William looked at his father across the grand dining table, he saw not the man who had raised him, but the monarch who had replaced him. And beneath that crown sat a heart still loyal to the woman who had fractured his childhood. This was not a feud. It was an emotional Cold War, each side waiting for the other to break the silence first. But the silence itself was corrosive, spreading through every corridor, every gesture, every exchange of words, too carefully chosen. The monarchy, for all its grandeur, was rotting from within. And William, trapped between duty and truth, realized that change would not come through diplomacy, it would come through defiance. Yet even in the quiet halls of resentment, one voice echoed loudest, the ghost of Diana, and the shadow she cast over everything Charles and Camilla built. No matter how many portraits hung on palace walls, one figure remained larger than life: Diana. Her memory was more than a legacy. It was a haunting presence that defined William's every choice. The crown may have tried to erase her pain, but her son carried it in silence. And when Camilla entered the throne room, that silence turned into quiet rebellion. For William, his mother was not just a chapter in royal history, she was a compass that never stopped guiding him. Every decision he made, every cause he championed, bore the invisible mark of her influence. He had watched the monarchy fail her, watched it turn cold in the face of her suffering, and he vowed it would never happen again. But vows are heavy things, especially when the same ghosts that once tore a family apart return wearing crowns of their own. With Charles now king and Camilla beside him, the palace had resurrected a wound that never healed. The very woman who once lived in the shadows of scandal now sat where Diana once stood denied. For William, it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unbearable. Charles's loyalty to Camilla became, in William's eyes, a betrayal of everything his mother endured. Each public appearance, each affectionate gesture between them, was a reminder of the cost Diana paid for her honesty. The monarchy had chosen its comfort over its conscience then, and now it was doing so again. While the world celebrated a new royal chapter, William saw only a rewritten history, one that erased the truth in favor of convenience. Behind closed doors, he wrestled with the quiet fury of a son who had never been allowed to grieve freely. His public composure masked an internal war between love for his father and loyalty to his mother's memory. Catherine understood this conflict better than anyone. She had studied Diana not as an icon, but as a woman who fought to protect her children in a world that refused her mercy. Catherine's empathy deepened her bond with William, becoming the calm that steadied him when the weight of expectation grew too heavy to bear. She too felt the sting of comparison, the endless headlines that painted her as the new Diana, a title both flattering and cruel. Every smile she offered in public carried the pressure of living up to an impossible ideal, one born of tragedy rather than triumph. She didn't resent it, but she saw how deeply it affected William, how every mention of his mother's name reopened a wound that never closed. The media's fascination with legacy only fueled the tension. Every photograph of Catherine beside Camilla became a battlefield of symbolism, one representing grace reborn, the other the reminder of betrayal. The narrative was merciless, and William knew it. He could see how history was repeating itself, how once again the crown was elevating the wrong woman while silencing the right voice. The monarchy had always favored stability over sincerity, but to William, that choice was destroying its soul. He believed the future of the institution lay not in ceremony but in conscience, a vision his father dismissed as naive. And yet, the deeper conflict was not between generations, but between truth and denial. William's life had become a balancing act between two legacies, the institution that shaped him and the mother who saved him from it. Every time he looked at Camilla, he saw not just his father's happiness, but the cost of it. To forgive her would mean betraying Diana's memory, and to stay silent meant betraying himself. That silence, once his shield, began to turn into a weapon, a quiet defiance that the palace could neither control nor predict. The air around them grew heavier with every unspoken word, every restrained look, every tense meeting that pretended normalcy while everything beneath the surface trembled. But it wasn't a ghost that shattered William's patience, it was a remark. A single moment of cruelty spoken in gold-lit halls that no apology could undo. It was supposed to be a night of unity, a royal dinner, to project stability amid growing public unease. Instead, it became the night the monarchy fractured. Surrounded by chandeliers, laughter, and power, a cruel remark fell from Queen Camilla's lips. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but it was lethal. In one sentence, she erased Diana's memory and shattered William's restraint. Before the guests could blink, history had changed course. The dinner began under the guise of peace. King Charles, weary of whispers about division within his family, had invited senior royals and close advisors to what was meant to be a symbol of reconciliation. Every gesture was orchestrated, every word rehearsed to paint the picture of a monarchy in control. But beneath that polished civility, tension simmered like an unspoken curse. William's patience was already worn thin, his trust strained to breaking point. Catherine, poised as ever, sat beside him, her presence a silent anchor in an ocean of deceit. Across the table, Camilla smiled the smile of a queen too comfortable in power, too certain that her influence was untouchable. The conversation drifted through politics, public duty, and ceremony until Camilla, with a trace of arrogance sharpened by years of quiet triumph, made her move. Her words were meant to amuse, to draw knowing laughter from those who had long accepted her reign. But what she said cut deeper than any jest could justify. With a glint of cruel amusement, she mocked Diana's legacy, reducing a woman revered by millions into a passing anecdote about chasing cameras instead of causes. The remark landed like a blade, swift, cold, unforgivable. Catherine froze, her composed expression faltering for the first time. Her eyes betrayed what her voice could not: pain, disbelief, and outrage. William saw it. He saw the hurt ripple through his wife, saw the shock in the faces of those who dared not intervene, and felt something inside him snap. He had endured silence, endured disrespect, endured years of watching his mother's memory treated as an inconvenience by those who once vilified her. But this was different. His children were near enough to hear it. George, curious and perceptive, caught the tone. Charlotte, sensitive and intelligent, understood more than anyone realized. Their innocent faces mirrored confusion and hurt, and that was the breaking point. When William looked toward his father, expecting a rebuke, he was met with something far worse: silence. Charles's eyes lowered, his mouth unmoving, as if loyalty to his wife outweighed his duty to truth. That silence thundered louder than Camilla's insult. It was betrayal, pure and undeniable. William's jaw tightened, his fists clenched beneath the table, and in that instant, the veneer of royal restraint disintegrated. His voice didn't rise, but the fury behind it was unmistakable. Every word he spoke struck with precision, heavy with years of suppressed pain. He reminded them that some names, some sacrifices, were too sacred to be mocked, that without his mother's grace, none of them would have survived the storm that once nearly destroyed the monarchy. The room fell deathly still. Even the clinking of cutlery stopped. No one dared breathe. Camilla's smirk faded, her confidence cracking as William's words hit their mark. Charles, torn between two loyalties, sat motionless, the weight of his inaction sinking into the silence. Catherine reached for William's hand, a quiet attempt to steady him, but she knew it was too late. The damage was irreversible. Every unspoken truth, every buried resentment had surfaced, poisoning the air beyond repair. The dinner ended not with a toast, but with an exodus. William rose first, his chair scraping against the polished floor, a sound that would echo in memory long after the night was over. He didn't look back. Those who witnessed it knew instinctively that something monumental had broken. The future king had walked away not just from a table, but from the illusion that peace within the palace could ever be real. By the time the royal doors closed that night, one truth became clear: William would never forgive. And within 24 hours, the palace gates would open for the last time under his watch. At midnight, while the world slept, the heir to the throne quietly vanished. No royal procession, no cameras, no farewell speeches, just the sound of hurried footsteps and a family choosing freedom over formality. It wasn't exile, it was rebellion. The moment the palace gates shut behind William and Catherine, centuries of royal obedience cracked. A prince had chosen peace over power, and the monarchy would never be the same. The decision wasn't spontaneous, it had been written in silence long before that fateful night. For weeks, William had been orchestrating what no royal dared to attempt: a controlled escape from the most guarded walls in Britain. Every detail had been planned with precision. A small circle of aides, those who had earned his absolute trust, were sworn to secrecy under the threat of dismissal if even a whisper escaped. Communication was minimal, coded, and brief. Each step of the plan was mapped like a military operation, down to the timing of when the palace guards rotated, when the press office dimmed its lights, and when London's restless energy gave way to stillness. It wasn't fear that drove him, it was clarity. For William, this was not running away from duty, but walking toward truth. Catherine's strength held the family together that night. She knew the cost of what they were about to do, and the storm it would unleash. But she also knew that staying would destroy the man she loved. She guided George, Charlotte, and Louis with calm grace, turning a night of chaos into a moment of trust. The children were told only what they needed to know, that they were going somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful. Their innocence shielded them from the depth of their parents' decision. But Catherine saw the questions in their eyes, the unspoken confusion that no mother could ever completely ease. Yet she held firm, her heart torn between her maternal instinct to protect and her duty to stand beside her husband's rebellion. When the time came, they didn't drive. That was deliberate. William wanted no engines, no noise, no trace of formality. He walked through the corridors, through the courtyard, through the same gates that for generations symbolized royal imprisonment disguised as privilege. His silence was defiance, a statement more powerful than any declaration could ever be. The guards who saw him pass were frozen in disbelief. Some thought it was a security drill. Others recognized the look in his eyes: resolute, final, untouchable. Not a single command was given to stop him. Even those bound by royal protocol knew instinctively that this was not a man abandoning duty, but a father protecting his soul. The palace clock struck midnight, as the final gate closed behind them. For the first time, the heir to the throne was not surrounded by power, but by the freedom of anonymity. Behind those gates, confusion erupted. Senior staff, alerted by whispers from watchmen, scrambled to verify what seemed impossible. "The prince has left," someone stammered into the secure line, a sentence that sent shockwaves through the heart of monarchy. Within minutes, corridors filled with hurried footsteps, the echoes of panic colliding with disbelief. The chain of command collapsed under the weight of the unthinkable. Orders were demanded, explanations sought, but none came. For the first time in living memory, the palace had no plan. By dawn, the story had begun to leak. One rumor became two, and by sunrise, the whispers had reached the press. Within hours, headlines screamed across Britain, "The future king has left the palace." Commentators struggled to define it. Some called it a mental break, others a political statement. The truth was neither. This was a man reclaiming control over a life that had never been his own. And while the monarchy spun in confusion, the people felt something unexpected: empathy. For the first time, they saw not a royal figurehead, but a human being standing up to a system that demanded silence. Back inside the palace, the walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour. Questions turned into accusations. Why wasn't anyone told? How could security fail? Who had helped him? But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. William didn't need permission. He didn't need approval. The crown might control everything within its reach, but it could never control conviction. His departure was not escape, it was evolution. A moment when the heir to the throne finally became the master of his own fate. But William hadn't fled into the dark. He had a destination, a refuge steeped in memory and meaning, chosen long before this night ever began. The nation imagined scandal, exile, or disgrace. But William's destination revealed something deeper. His family's new home wasn't a fortress. It was a sanctuary tied to his mother's memory. Every wall whispered her name. Every path echoed her laughter. By taking Catherine and the children there, William wasn't running from the crown. He was running toward the woman who taught him what love looked like before duty ever tried to rewrite it. The estate he chose was not random, nor was it impulsive. It was deliberate, a place that once brought peace to a woman the world never stopped mourning. The land itself held stories of Diana's compassion, her laughter, and her quiet longing for freedom beyond palace gates. Now, decades later, her son had returned, not to grieve, but to reclaim. The home's stillness became more than refuge, it was redemption. For the first time in years, William could breathe without the weight of cameras or courtiers. He could be a father, not a figurehead, a husband, not an heir. Every decision he made from that point forward would not echo the monarchy's cold traditions, but his mother's unyielding heart. This was not escape, it was transformation. The same institution that had once isolated Diana was now being quietly defied by her son. Every moment William spent away from the palace was a silent victory for her legacy. To those who watched from afar, it was as if Diana's unfinished story had finally found its resolution through him. She had always wanted her children to experience love unbound by royal duty, and now, through William's defiance, her wish had taken form. The chains that once silenced her spirit had been broken by the very heir she fought so hard to protect. Catherine, too, felt the significance of the teen day where they had come to rest. As she walked beside her husband, she saw how this place seemed to heal him. Here, he was no longer the prince burdened by expectation, but the boy who once held his mother's hand in simpler times. Together, they vowed to raise George, Charlotte, and Louis, not as heirs to a dynasty, but as children who could laugh freely, question boldly, and love without restraint. It was a quiet rebellion wrapped in serenity, an unspoken declaration that family would come before formality and compassion before the crown. But the outside world did not rest. Within hours, whispers began to surface across news outlets and digital screens. Reporters traced the escape route, satellites scanned countryside estates, and theories erupted like wildfire. Every journalist wanted the first image, the first confirmation, the first clue to where the future king had gone. But no one found him. William's silence became his armor. In that silence, the public saw something more powerful than a press conference or royal statement. They saw conviction. He wasn't hiding. He was choosing to live outside the script the monarchy had written for him. The more the palace tried to control the story, the louder his absence spoke. For those who understood, this wasn't abandonment. It was a reclamation of identity. The boy who had once walked behind his mother's coffin now walked ahead of her shadow, carrying her legacy into a future where love was no longer sacrificed for duty. The monarchy could issue all the statements it wanted. None would change what William's quiet act had already accomplished. He had rewritten the unspoken rule that the crown could own everything. It could not own him. But back in London, the silence was unbearable. For King Charles, this wasn't just defiance. It was a declaration of war. Inside Buckingham Palace, the air turned cold. Advisors whispered of crisis, courtiers scrambled for statements, and Charles faced the unthinkable. His own son had turned rebellion into a global spectacle. Every hour brought new headlines, new humiliation. The monarchy that once appeared eternal now looked fragile, fractured, and gasping for control. In every corridor, one question echoed: had the crown just lost its future? Within the palace, the chaos was unlike anything seen in generations. The royal machine, built on precision and protocol, had descended into panic. Senior aides rushed to contain the damage, drafting statements and counter-statements while trying to piece together the timeline of William's disappearance. Phones rang without pause. Press officers fielded inquiries they could not answer, and ministers demanded explanations that no one dared to give. The system that had weathered wars, divorces, and scandals was suddenly powerless against a single act of silence. William had not spoken a word, yet his absence had become the loudest sound in the kingdom. For King Charles, the crisis was more than political. It was deeply personal. He found himself torn between two forces he could no longer reconcile: his loyalty to Camilla and his duty to the throne. To defend one meant betraying the other. In the privacy of his study, he wrestled with the truth that haunted him. His son's rebellion wasn't a misunderstanding or a tantrum. It was deliberate. It was moral. And the world, for the first time, seemed to agree with William. Newspapers that once worshipped the crown now questioned its purpose. Commentators spoke openly of a monarchy at war with itself. Charles, who had waited a lifetime to sit upon the throne, was now watching it tremble beneath his feet. Behind the palace doors, the blame began to shift like sand in a storm. Advisors pointed fingers at one another. Some claimed the press office had failed to control the narrative. Others whispered that Camilla's influence had pushed the king too far from his son. A leaked memo only made things worse, exposing frantic internal discussions, labeled Operation Containment. It outlined a plan to downplay William's departure, to frame it as a temporary retreat rather than a declaration of independence. But the public wasn't fooled. The document's cold corporate tone only deepened the perception that the monarchy had become more business than bloodline. Inside the royal household, loyalties fractured. Staff who had served both Charles and William for years now found themselves forced to choose sides. Some remained loyal to the king, clinging to the belief that the monarchy must survive no matter the cost. Others, however, quietly admired William's courage, whispering that perhaps his defiance was the beginning of something the monarchy desperately needed: truth. Even among the courtiers, once bound by silence, the cracks were visible. The whispers grew louder. If the future king had walked away, what did that mean for the institution itself? In the outside world, the chaos only deepened. Parliament, uneasy and cautious, began murmuring about succession stability. Could a fractured royal family still command respect in a modern democracy? Questions that had long been avoided now spilled into public debate. Should the monarchy adapt or dissolve? The political establishment, once the crown's silent ally, now feared the tide of change William's actions had unleashed. Every attempt by the palace to suppress the conversation only made it louder. And in the center of this growing storm stood Queen Camilla, furious and unrelenting. She saw William's departure not as a crisis of conscience, but as a personal insult, a challenge to her authority, her place, her legitimacy. To her, this wasn't rebellion. It was betrayal. Behind closed doors, she demanded that Charles act decisively. "The crown cannot bend to a child," she reportedly told him, her voice cold with indignation. Her insistence hardened the king's resolve, but deepened the divide. Charles's hesitation was destroying him, while Camilla's determination was destroying what little peace remained within the palace. The monarchy had always thrived on unity, the illusion that behind the gilded gates there was order, harmony, control. But that illusion was gone. What remained was a battlefield disguised as a family. For the first time, the palace's power seemed hollow, its authority questioned, its destiny uncertain. And yet, as Buckingham Palace descended into chaos, William's silence remained unbroken. He had said nothing, but his defiance spoke volumes. The monarchy's greatest threat had not come from scandal or politics, but from within its own bloodline. But while the palace waged a political war, William's battle was far more personal. It was about protecting the only thing the crown could never give him: his children's innocence. For years, William carried the crown's expectations like chains. Now, for the first time, he saw what true freedom looked like in the faces of his children. In their laughter, untouched by courtly politics, he found purpose. This wasn't abdication. It was protection. His vow was simple yet unbreakable. "They will not suffer as my mother did." And in that promise, the monarchy's future quietly changed forever. In the calm that followed the storm, William finally understood what his life had been building toward: not a throne, not power, but peace. The weight of legacy had crushed his childhood, shaping him into a symbol before he was ever allowed to be a son. Now, watching his children play without the shadow of cameras or palace expectations, he realized the true cost of royalty. It wasn't wealth or scrutiny that destroyed the soul. It was the quiet erosion of innocence, the way duty replaced joy and protocol replaced truth. He had lived that life, and he refused to let history repeat itself. The cycle of sacrifice would end with him. Catherine shared that conviction completely. For years, she had walked the line between loyalty and love, balancing royal duty with maternal instinct. She had seen firsthand the emotional price William paid behind his public calm. The tension, the restraint, the constant fear of becoming what he most despised. Together, they made a silent pact. The monarchy could claim their titles, their roles, even their reputations, but not their children. George, Charlotte, and Louis would grow up with the gift Diana had longed to give her sons: the freedom to be human. Catherine's voice, steady yet unwavering, became the heartbeat of that promise. "We owe them a childhood that belongs to them, not the crown," she told him one evening, and William knew she was right. The vow soon became more than personal, it became spiritual. As William reflected on his mother's pain, he saw in her tragedy a warning. Diana had fought for authenticity in a world addicted to illusion, and she paid the price for it. Her honesty had unsettled the institution, her compassion had outshone its grandeur, and now, decades later, her son was confronting the same struggle. Yet this time, the outcome would be different. William wasn't fighting for the approval of courtiers or the validation of headlines. He was fighting for legacy. Not the kind etched in gold, but the kind written in the hearts of his children. George, now old enough to understand the whispers around his family, began asking questions that pierced deeper than William expected. "Why did we leave, Papa?" he asked once, his voice carrying both curiosity and innocence. William hesitated, then answered not as a prince, but as a father. Because sometimes, doing what's right means walking away from what's expected. The boy's eyes held pride, not confusion. It was in that moment William realized his greatest lesson wasn't about the crown, but about courage. The courage to protect truth, even when surrounded by tradition. Charlotte, wise beyond her years, saw her father's quiet struggle. She asked once if she would ever wear the crown. William's answer was both tender and revealing. "Only if it makes you happy," he said softly. For him, that was leadership, giving his children the freedom to choose. The crown could command loyalty, but it could never command love. And as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected began to shift. The public, once divided, started to see William not as a deserter, but as a father, standing for truth. Polls turned, commentators softened. Headlines that once accused him of rebellion now praised his humanity. "A king of conscience," one paper declared. The people saw in him what they had once seen in Diana, a heart unafraid to challenge power in the name of compassion. But while the world began to understand, the palace did not. William's vow to protect his children was seen not as noble, but as dangerous. To the old order, his love was rebellion, and his silence was threat. Yet even as the monarchy trembled, William's resolve only grew stronger. Because beneath the conflict, beneath the fury and politics, he knew one truth above all else. Crowns fade, titles shift, but the legacy of love endures. And yet, even as the nation softened, the old order refused to yield. The storm within Buckingham Palace was about to find its voice in one final, explosive confrontation. Days of silence ended when Prince William finally faced the world. Cameras rolled. The nation held its breath. With Catherine by his side and his children watching, he spoke not as a prince, but as a son, a husband, a father. His words were calm, but they thundered through history. "I will not raise my children within walls that suffocate rather than protect." In that moment, rebellion became renewal, and the monarchy itself trembled. The speech had been anticipated for days, yet no one could have predicted what he would say. The palace had braced itself for damage control, the press for scandal, and the world for answers. But William's words were not an HB attack, they were an awakening. His voice, steady but charged with emotion, cut through the noise of speculation that had filled every screen, every headline. He began, not with apology, but with truth. He spoke of responsibility, not the kind written in decrees and oaths, but the kind written in love and loss. "There comes a point," he said, "when duty to one's family must outweigh the expectations of a crown." He didn't need to name names. The weight of his meaning was clear. His message wasn't just to the monarchy, it was to the world watching. He acknowledged the privilege of his position, the honor of his heritage, but also the cost of that inheritance. "My mother taught me," he continued, his voice tightening, "that love must always outweigh duty, and truth must never be sacrificed for tradition." The mention of Diana's name shifted the air. It was as if the spirit of the woman who had once challenged the system's coldness now spoke again through her son. The room fell silent. Across the country, televisions glowed with his words, carrying echoes of the past into the present. Catherine's presence beside him said as much as his speech. She didn't need to speak. Her calm gaze, her quiet composure, her unwavering support turned her into the embodiment of everything William was fighting for. Their unity was undeniable. Together, they represented a new definition of royalty, one grounded not in hierarchy, but in humanity. The strength of their partnership had become the foundation upon which their rebellion rested. And as the children briefly appeared, George, Charlotte, and Louis standing close to their parents, the world saw the heart of the message. This was not a renunciation, it was a rebirth. William's tone shifted from personal confession to solemn declaration. "My family deserves the right to live freely," he said, "to laugh without judgment, to love without permission, and to grow without fear." He paused, the silence between each sentence heavier than any crown. The monarchy has always spoken of legacy, but what is a legacy if it costs us our humanity? In those words, centuries of royal doctrine trembled. It was not rebellion, it was reflection. Not vengeance, but vision. He was not tearing the monarchy down, he was forcing it to look at itself. The reaction was instantaneous and divided. Around the world, millions stood in awe of his courage. Global headlines called it the speech that redefined royalty. In London, some wept while others seethed. Parliament debated the implications, scholars dissected his tone, and inside the palace, silence reigned. For King Charles, the address was both a heartbreak and a reckoning, the confirmation that his son's defiance had crossed from private feud into public declaration. For Queen Camilla, it was humiliation, the unspoken realization that her influence had birthed the very rebellion she feared most. And yet, despite the chaos it unleashed, William's message resonated. Across generations, people saw themselves in his struggle. The father, who chose love over power. The son who refused to let history dictate his children's fate. His speech had stripped the monarchy of its illusion of invincibility, replacing it with something far more dangerous: truth. The old order had always survived scandal through silence, but William's honesty left no shadows for denial to hide in. When the final words left his lips, the nation knew it had witnessed something irreversible. "We cannot heal the past," he concluded softly, "but we can protect the future." The cameras lingered as his family turned to leave, the silence that followed more powerful than any applause. It was the silence of realization, the understanding that the monarchy's survival would now depend on the very man who had dared to walk away from it. And as the cameras faded, one truth lingered in every mind. Across Britain, history had turned a page, and the crown would never shine the same way again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.